to the Youngs podcast. I am Shay,
And I'm Dwight.
and we are the Youngs. So, as you can see, we have a little bit of a different setup today. You're in our
Mm.
living room, aka our movie room. We just wanted to do more of like a laid back, chilled, I guess, video today. And you guys can always let us know if you like, the more settled videos more than the more serious videos that we do.
Yeah,
um, but I feel like one thing that is important for us to touch on, because I feel like it's become such a big thing now, at least for me, since like corona and stuff like that has happened, is mental health.
yeah,
I think just because so many people were stuck inside and didn't have like those outlets that they maybe had before, I think mental health kind of like went wild. And I don't mean that in like a negative context, but I feel like just because a lot of people couldn't get out and have those outlets, it kind of really stirred people the wrong way.
yeah. I think mental health really came to the forefront, and then also how to treat mental health. Actually, it got brought to the forefront as well, but there was a lot more exposure out there, and
Hmm.
we realized at that point it was a much bigger problem than what we originally thought. When you speak about mental health, it was basically just the individuals who had some sort of chemical imbalance or some sort of, mental disease,
Hmm.
whether it be schizophrenia or some bipolar disorder or something of that nature. Never really thought about individuals that were dealing with depression and trauma and things of that nature that would actually affect you,
Hmm.
mentally and not just short term and long term.
Yeah, I think a common like misunderstanding when it comes to mental health is, I think a lot of people who don't have maybe certain backgrounds like medical, or maybe for you law enforcement, for people who don't have to deal with things like that on a day-to-day basis, they think people with mental health issues, either they got into some kind of substance that maybe their body didn't agree with,
Yeah,
or something just happened to them when if they were a kid, or they were just born that way.
yeah,
But a lot of the times that's not what happens. Majority of the time it's because of a trauma that a person has experienced. And not everyone's body obviously responds correctly to trauma. And going back to what I said before about COVID, a lot of people were dealing with, loss of a loved one, or, maybe the living situation wasn't what they wanted to be in, and they're depressed because of finances and stuff like that. And, bottling those things up and not being able to go out and, let's say, go to the gym or do
right.
something that is beneficial to them mentally, that's when people go off the handle.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. I mean, that's why COVID actually brought it to the forefront because of all the things you just named. It's difficult when you don't have that, outlet or those de-stressors in order to release some of that, trauma, depression, whatever it is that you've
Hmm.
gone through in life and that you depend on to be able to release that. And as it builds and builds and builds, your body takes it in a different way
Hmm.
and it just can't release it. It's almost like you get some sort of chemical imbalance in your brain. And once it gets imbalanced,
It's extremely difficult,
yeah,
to balance it out. And I think that's what happens a lot of the times. A lot of people get put under a certain amount of stress, or if your body gets put through a certain amount of trauma, your body can only deal with so much. So then it causes your levels to be off. And because a lot of people can't afford certain, um, I would say like health coverage
yeah,
or whatever you
certain
want to say,
treatments or what have you.
then
Yeah,
they go without having that treatment. And then it's not until they have a crazy episode, and then police have to get involved and they get to the hospital and stuff like that, and then they're diagnosed. A lot of people ignore the seriousness of mental health. And I think, like, perfect example, when I talk about trauma, like for me, a major trauma that I went through was losing my daughter. And losing my daughter was traumatic because I lost my daughter, but it was even more traumatic because my whole life I've dealt with loss. from the time I was little to the time I became an adult, everyone in my life has passed away, including both my parents. So at the time that I was going through what I was going through with my daughter, 4 months later, I had to bury my father. So, like, just that heaviness and that depression that I was put into because of those two major events, it could have went very bad for me. But because I did have the outlet of the gym, I started to go to the gym twice a day, um, things like that. And that really helped me stay afloat mentally because I really don't know what kind of mental break I would have had just dealing with both of those things at the same time. Not everybody's mind is able to handle multiple traumatic events back to back. And some people go through one traumatic event and they shut down from it. Just one.
Yeah.
And I feel like I remember growing up, it was like weeks apart. I had one uncle die this Wednesday. The next Wednesday, it was someone else. It was like, you know, constant everyone dying, everyone dying, everyone dying. So to experience like losing a child that you feel grow inside of you, you feel move inside of you, it's just a whole nother level of trauma, and your body just doesn't know how to respond. It's kind of like you're just numb and you're shut down and you don't feel anything. But I think the fact that I had access to a gym is what really saved me from having like that mental, I'm going to lose my mind and I don't know if I'm going to come back from it.
Yeah. I mean, just that alone, I couldn't imagine going through that. And then having, our son and that fear of the possibility of going
Right.
through that again. That trauma doesn't go away.
Hmm.
Like you said, the gym and different things like that. That helps you cope with it,
Right.
but it doesn't eliminate it. And obviously having our son who's healthy
Hmm.
helps,
Right.
but it doesn't eliminate that trauma that you've gone through. And I think when you speak about mental health and people have suffered loss, such as children,
Hmm.
I think that's a huge, huge part of that. Let alone loved ones.
Right. I
You
think
know,
when you lose a child, like, I've heard so many stories because when you lose a child, you become more familiar with people who are in that same situation. And I remember when I lost my daughter, there was a woman and she dedicated her life to taking photographs of the deceased children with the parent and kind of making the baby look presentable and dressing the baby up and taking photos and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is a woman that doesn't know me. She's lost multiple children herself, and she has that energy and that power to kind of help someone else to continue to go on. And it's like, I've only lost one child, and I almost lost my mind. So this individual lost multiple children, and you just never really know what a person is going through or what they're battling with. They can walk by you and be smiling, but have the weight of the world on their shoulders, and you just don't know. And they could snap tomorrow, and you'll be like, "Oh, I just saw her in the market and she was laughing and she was saying everything was good." Or, like, that's why they always say check on your friends because you never know. Even, I hate to say it, but the S word, when people take their lives away, it could be something so small
yeah,
that just sets them off because they could be carrying the weight of the world, and all they need is for one person to, even if it's a stranger, just say something positive to them, and then they go out and it's a stranger that says something negative, or they have that one bad interaction, and then that's it.
yeah. You just never know individuals' capacity,
Hmm.
especially after they've experienced some sort of trauma. It's just so overwhelming sometimes to some people, especially individuals that maybe they don't have someone to talk to. Maybe they
Hmm.
can't afford a therapist or, a professional to go and get advice from, to
Hmm.
share things with. Maybe they can't afford, from a medical standpoint, maybe they can't afford a particular kind of medication or a particular kind of doctor to go to seek
Hmm.
out that medication. So I agree with you. I mean, it's very important to check on your loved ones,
Absolutely.
especially when you know they've gone through something. It's not
Hmm.
about whether they look okay. It's not about whether they're acting okay. It's about the fact that they've experienced it. So
Hmm.
if they've experienced it, It hasn't gone away.
Right.
So
And just to touch on what you said, I also just want to make it a point like it's also not about if this person is strong from what you know. You know what I'm saying? So this could be the strongest person in your family that you may know. Oh, they're always okay. They deal with this, and they've never had a breakdown, or whatever the case may be. That may be the main person that needs you to check on them.
yeah,
Some people are very good at hiding what they go through. They get up and they're fine. They're fine. And you just won't know until it's too late. And I just want to stretch because I think for me, being in the medical field and stuff like that, I find that the African American community, sorry, and the Latino community, for some reason, those two communities, it's like if you are trying to get therapy or trying to get some kind of counseling, it's almost like looked at it as it's a sign of like a weakness.
yeah,
Growing up, it was like, you don't need no counselor. You just deal with what you're going through. And it's like, but sometimes you need that professional help. And that's okay. I don't want that to continue to be looked down on all the time.
yeah. And I think now we're in 2023, almost 2024. I'm hoping that the mindset has changed, throughout the Latino community and throughout the African American community and just any community.
Hmm.
I'm hoping that now we're modernized enough where we recognize mental health for exactly what it is,
Hmm.
and the fact that a lot of things are needed to combat it.
Hmm.
And that's just what we have to do, as individuals and as loved ones of individuals who are going through something, who have experienced something.
Hmm.
We talk about loss of loved ones, and I know we'll touch on this more, in an upcoming episode.
Yeah.
But when you experience so many loved ones who you have lost in a short time period, just like you spoke about Zoe,
Hmm.
just like you spoke about your father, and any other loved one you lost in a short time period, your mother, we've experienced that loss.
Yeah.
We've experienced that loss, and for me, when I lost my grandmother,
Hmm.
you know, that to me was the most devastating loss.
Hmm.
That was the most devastating loss I could have experienced, and it was life changing for me.
Hmm.
It was truly life changing for me. And then you fast forward maybe 2, 3 years after that, and I've lost probably a total of 8 relatives,
Hmm.
including my mother. That's pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
It's pretty traumatic and for losing my mom, there was no warning signs.
Yeah.
There was no long-term illness. There was no, it was, it was almost like it was sudden.
Hmm.
The same day we were told that she was recovering and things were looking up and her vitals were looking up, an hour later, it's hurry up and get to the hospital because she's not going to make it.
Hmm.
Things change that fast. And, when you experience the loss like that, especially a multitude of people,
Hmm.
that are important people in your life, it's very, very, very traumatic.
Hmm.
And you experience different individuals being in the medical field. A lot of different individuals come to the hospital for various reasons,
Right.
and you get to see how they are from day to day that maybe the general public doesn't see.
Hmm.
Maybe people, in their home have never seen up close before, except for on TV.
Right.
And then in my field, I see them every day
Hmm.
and deal with them every day, and the same thing. People don't recognize the signs. People don't recognize the behavior. People don't understand how serious it is.
Hmm.
And for my profession, it's not only the individuals that you're out helping, not only the individuals that are going through a crisis or have gone through some traumatic event,
Hmm.
it's the actual officers as well.
Yeah.
Like the human body is not meant to go through so much trauma. And if you have, let's just say, an officer who has handled X amount of complaints a day, and some of those complaints are helping other individuals through their trauma, or seeing something that's very traumatic, or dealing with some sort of death of someone, death
Mhm.
of a child, some sort of assault, some sort of homicide, something like that, you mentally are not equipped to deal with that much. Like, people break down, and you never know a person's capacity for being able to retain all of that. You have to retain it in my particular profession. You
Mhm.
have to be able to move on to the next
Mhm.
complaint, or to the next person who needs your help, or the next person that you need to protect, or what have you. And slowly but surely, it adds up in your mind. Yesterday, you dealt with this, you saw that. Today, now you see something new, now you deal with something new.
Mhm.
The next day is something new, something else. The next week is the same thing, and so on and so forth. And for me, that's why the gym was my outlet as well,
Mhm.
because it's so stressful. It's so stressful dealing with that day in and day out that it affects some officers in a different way,
Mhm.
and it affects their mental health, and then they can't recover from it. It's 2023, it's October, and it's to the point where it's almost 70 police officer suicides across the nation already. And it seems like every year we're up over 100 suicides, successful suicides. That doesn't count the attempted ones. And a lot of those individuals that you work with, you have no idea what they're going through because they seem like they're okay.
I
And
remember when I was working in a hospital one time, and I remember this very, very clearly because I was very surprised that it happened. There was an officer where I was working, and the officer came in, gave his gun to the front desk of the hospital, and said, I need to check myself in because I'm thinking of hurting myself. And I've never heard of that, I've never seen it. And being with someone who is of law enforcement now, and listening to some of the things that you've seen and you've had to endure, I can't even imagine the amounts mentally that you have to go through, because just me having to see loved ones laid out, you know even my child, I can't get those images out of my mind. So if I had to really deal with that every day, I don't know if I could handle that.
yeah, it's very, very difficult, from even back when I had my time just as a patrol officer,
Mhm.
going to accident scenes where they're fatals, and you have children that are deceased, you have adults that are deceased, and they're deceased, but you're still performing CPR, you're still pulling them out of the vehicle, you're still doing all the things that you need to do, and that you're not going to be able to get those visions out of your mind, and the blood that's on your uniform, you're not going to be able to get out, and that you're going to be affected the rest of the day. But guess what? You still have to help other people. You still have to work the rest of your shift. And you fast forward in my career, I was a detective for over 8 years.
Mhm.
And you deal with the gruesome of the gruesome. You deal with the homicides, the attempted homicides, the assaults, the sexual assaults. And a lot of those traumatic events are violent. They're extremely, extremely violent. And you can't get those images out of your head. They stick with you. And it
Mhm.
feels like they take a little bit of you each time you have to deal with them. Even just a deceased loved one where you have to go to the home and notify the family. The family's reaction sticks with you. Like, these are real people losing real loved ones, and you're the person who has to tell them that their loved one is not returning home.
Mhm.
You have to explain to them the reason why. Or you respond to the house where the loved one is deceased that the family has found. You have to figure out a way to console them. You have to figure out a way to work through that. And it's very, very, very
Mhm.
traumatic. It's very difficult to deal with.
Mhm. I think a major thing that we want to stress is for you to get help,
Yes.
and for you know anyone who is struggling with maybe depression, anxiety, postpartum, because that's a major thing for females. Especially for me, I think I've always heard of postpartum, and I've always been like, oh, I'm not going to be one that experiences postpartum. I've worked out my whole pregnancy. Like, I have a great support system. You're amazing. So I didn't think that, like, I could deal with depression, but I feel like I've been dealing with depression, and my son's, like, about to be 9 months. Um, and it's not a good feeling to go through. So I would really just really, really, really say seek help or therapy. Just whatever you could do, because although you may have like a good support system and a good husband or partner or whatever, not all the time can that person help you with what you need help with, and it's not really their responsibility to help you with all the things that you may be going through, because they're going through things as well. And if that person's already on 50 and you're already on 50, it's like, how can I take from your 50 if I'm on 50?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you just have to do what you need to do. But I just really think it's important for everyone to get help before it's too late. Um,
Yeah, I mean, if you can't seek it out yourself, consult with someone who can help you.
mhm.
And by consulting with someone, I mean, ask your partner, ask a friend.
Yeah, I think it was hard for me to accept the fact that I needed to seek outside counseling. Like, I think hearing it from you in a positive way was still difficult for me, because you know me more than anyone. So for you to come to me and be like, babe, you just been different. So I think, I've tried this and this, and you just still seem like something's missing. I suggest you do this. It's definitely a hard pill to swallow, because the stigma behind therapy is something's wrong with you and you need to be fixed.
Yeah,
And, that was tough for me to swallow. But after having a baby, I'm not the same. I'm extremely just like, I'm depressed sometimes. I'm very like more emotional. I'm more sensitive. Um, and I just think sometimes just getting that out to someone who is a professional and not your partner is gonna be like good for you, because you shouldn't look for all those things in your partner, because now your partner is like that other dependent. Does that make sense?
it definitely makes sense. And when you go through things, it does affect your partner.
Yeah.
And whether or not your partner tells you it affects them, whether or not they let on that it affects them, it does affect them. And no one wants to see their partner suffer.
Mhm.
That alone affects your partner, whether or not they were going through that traumatic event or the postpartum or the loss or what have you. It still affects them because they
Mhm.
don't want you to be in that space.
Yeah.
And at the time, most likely they're helpless
Yeah.
because they don't know what to do, but they're trying to do everything most likely that they can possibly think of, and nothing's working.
Mhm.
So it's very difficult for everyone involved.
Mhm.
So that's why, it's very important to seek out that help, or to listen to your partner, or have your partner help you seek out that help instead of trying to just handle it yourselves.
Mhm.
And I wanted to touch on one last thing as far as law enforcement is concerned. And this can be used whether it's law enforcement or not, but I actually missed something one time in my career. I had an officer working for me when I was a sergeant on my shift, and I had no idea what this particular officer was going through. I had no idea what this particular officer was dealing with. And I had just spoke to him the day before, and I spoke to him in one of the meetings that I had, the one-on-one meetings that I had used to have with the shifts.
Mhm.
And every 6 months, I would sit each officer down and speak to them individually and then collectively together, but individually. And I'd ask them, how they were making out on the shift. If there's anything I could do to help them. What am I doing that I could do better? What are my shortcomings as a leader, as a supervisor, that maybe I could tweak and tune and improve on. in order to assist them a little bit better. So I always look forward to that because I wanted the feedback, because I wanted to be better and I wanted to be the best leader I possibly could be. And our conversation was great. He said everything was great. He said he loved the shift. Everything was fine. And it wasn't until the next day I was at another officer on my shift's wedding. And I remember at the wedding reception, one of my colleagues called me into one of the other rooms and we stepped out of the reception and told me what had happened. Told me that my officer had taken his own life with his service weapon and that his family was there. His wife and his newborn child was there in the residence. So I had to leave the wedding and I had to go directly to the residence. And at the time, the other officers that were on my shift were working overtime. So they were there working and were the first ones to respond to him having taken his life.
Mm-hmm.
So we were there all night and we had to remove his body from the residence. And at the time, his significant other was an employee
Mm-hmm.
at our police department as well.
Right.
It was just so tough to deal with because I knew him. I knew his family. I liked him. I liked his family. And I felt for the longest time that I missed all the signs. I felt like I didn't check on him like I was supposed to. I felt like I had failed. And I carried that weight for the longest time. The longest time. We had meetings, we had all kinds of therapy sessions as a group, and I had them individually with the different counseling programs that were set up for our agency. And I just couldn't shake the fact that I missed all the signs. No matter what he said to me, because I had so much experience, I should have saw it. You know, I do this for a living.
Mm-hmm.
I should have saw what was going on with him, and I didn't see it. And I just felt so devastated. So then later, the family asked me to head the funeral detail, and it was one of the toughest things I've ever done. It was so tough, and it felt like I lost a part of my family, and it felt like I had to go through that trauma all over again at the funeral. It was really difficult, and I can't stress enough for you to check on your loved ones, check on your friends, check on these individuals that you know have gone through traumatic events.
Mm-hmm.
Check on these individuals that you know have suffered loss. Check on these individuals that you know are not acting like themselves.
Yeah. I would suggest therapy, counseling. If you need to drive to the closest ER because you can't get a hold of someone or whatever, like even if you don't have a car and you need to call local law enforcement because you're having a mental break, they will
Yeah.
help you.
Yes.
You know, they will help you with resources. They will take you to the hospital if you need to so
Absolutely.
that you can get the treatment that you need. So I would just say love on your loved ones, check on your loved ones, check on your loved ones that you may think are strong and that they seem like they don't have nothing going on because those are always the ones that have the most going on.
Yes.
Um, is there anything else you want to say, honey?
No, I think we covered it all,
Hmm.
and at least we covered enough to where you get our point, to where you understand, at least our perspective of mental health and our
Hmm.
perspective on trauma, because that's what we have experienced. So that's what we're trying to educate everyone else on who maybe hasn't experienced that,
Hmm.
but knows somebody in their family or their friends or
Yes.
whatever, or coworker who has experienced the trauma. So now you have this information and maybe you can help someone else
Yep.
or help yourself.
Yep. And from the Youngs podcast to you, if you are someone who is struggling, who feels like you're alone, who feels like you're depressed, we want to tell you that you have a purpose here, that we are proud of you, You've come such a long way. Don't give up. Somebody is going to miss you. So keep on keeping on. We're sorry that it is such a heavy podcast this week, but it's something that is important, and mental crisis is on the rise. We deal with it every day in our careers, and we just want everyone to, become more aware of the issue at hand. So I think that's it for this episode. We want everyone to continue to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Also, go ahead and head over to our Instagram and follow us, okay? And we're
Definitely.
out.